All right, guys, welcome back to Elite Start Training, and welcome back to the search tactics portion of our basic search operations course. With this first video here in this module, we're going to talk a little bit high level about search theory, search terminology, and just kind of introduce you to what search looks like from the operator perspective. We're going to lead this off by talking about the different stages of a search operation. We talked in the last module some of that pre-assignment activity, that stuff that's leading up to getting teams out into the field. Now we lay this out across a timeline, so that way we can see what it should look like, what a well-rounded search operation should look like from start to finish. It starts here with the pre-planning, and let me get my pen up and going here. It starts with pre-planning, and this is the work that's going to be done before we ever put teams in the field, before we're ever notified of a search. This is going through and working through our SOGs, getting roles and responsibilities identified on the team. This is training, practicing, doing any kind of preventative search and rescue work that we can do, any kind of networking that we need to do with other search and rescue teams, so that way we can fundamentally cover a lot of the basis in what I would call a good, well-rounded search catalog, wilderness search and rescue catalog. Trying to get as many of that identified and squared away before we actually move into a search operations. If there's areas that we normally see people go lost or missing, we could start to maybe even segment that out a little bit. We could train there so that way we're familiar. But pre-planning is all about what's the groundwork that we can lay beforehand to either prevent someone from getting lost altogether, or if we do have to go, we can arrive and execute the mission efficiently and quickly. So from there, we move into the notification phase, which is something we talked about in the last module. So this is where we get some kind of a notification. We're being activated. We have enough information at that point to put teams in the field. It's safe for us to do that. So then it's time for us to go ahead and activate the team, which takes us to planning and strategy. Planning and strategy is usually is conducted within its own element. This is the leadership within your team, or a dedicated planning element. These are the folks that they are equipped, and they specialize in taking in information and building the mission assignments, building the tactical plan for the mission. Okay, so it can be done by your more senior members of your team, or if you have a dedicated planning element, that's usually who's doing that. And this is getting teams set up for your briefing. This would include your briefing, will be included in this. Make sure we can spell right. Our briefing will be included in that as well. And then that leads into tactics and techniques, which is what we're going to focus on in this particular module. But tactics and techniques, this is how we're actually going to execute the search assignment. We're going to talk about, how we're going to stack our teams, what kind of spacing we're going to have, what are the things that we're doing along the way to execute the mission. We'll spend a lot of time talking about that, but this is the actual in the field and executing the plan. And what's missing on this chart here really is there's a cycle to this. There's a cycle to really, actually, let me go back here and erase this real quick, because it goes back to right here, where there's a cycle to our planning and strategy and the tactics and techniques. And whenever we get into the incident command system, and you guys start down this journey, you'll take some courses in incident command system, and we'll talk about what's called the planning P. Okay, the planning P is the cycle of planning that we use in the incident command system, but it also translates over to search and rescue as well. But it's just a way of continuing operations and setting expectations for each operational period after we get through the initial response. And so what's missing from this particular diagram is this cycle is going to continue until either we have made a finding or we have exhausted all reasonable efforts. And then at that point, whenever we have decided whenever the search ends or we've decided the search is going to end, that's whenever we can move over to the demobilization phase. And this is getting the teams back to wherever we need to get them back to, get them out of the field, go through our debriefings, and send them on their way, hopefully safely. You know, we'll evaluate and make sure that they can make it home safely. But demobilizing is it's always one of those things from a search manager perspective. You're keeping in the back of your mind, how do we get everyone out of here and get everyone home safely? How do we wind this search down? That's what that demobilization phase is all about. And then after that, we have the after action review. The after action review is super critical as well, because we use this to determine what lessons learned we have from the search. We'll take a look at what went well. What are some things that we have opportunities to improve on? What needs to be updated? What needs to be acquired, maybe through equipment? What do we not have that we need? But that after action review really starts the bigger cycle of pre-planning, is what that does. That after action review, it starts the cycle over again. It gets us in a pre-planning mode. So that's a very key component of this as well. So moving on to a little bit of terminology. And again, what I want to do here is really set the stage for giving you guys the fundamentals. That way, whenever we get into and discuss this, you kind of have a lay of the land of what we're talking about. So these three terms right here are very common terms in search and rescue. And we'll start off with point last seen, or PLS. You'll see it abbreviated quite frequently as PLS. But this is a specific location where the victim was positively identified by a witness. This is a visual, okay? This is a visual. I saw this person at this location, okay? This is I can verify that they were at that location. A last known point is a little bit different, or a LKP. You'll also see last known position in some texts, or some people may use that term. They mean the same thing there. It's an interchangeable term, but it's a general location where there is reasonable suspicion that the victim was prior to going missing, or a location where a clue associated with the victim is located. So the key here is reasonable suspicion, okay? We have enough evidence to say that they were here at some point in time. We believe that this is the last evidence we have of them being at a specific location, the most current information that we have. And it's both of these drive at places where we can plan our search efforts, okay? And both of these tie into this last term here. Both of these tie into this last term of initial planning point, or IPP. This is a location where the search efforts are going to begin based on the point last seen or a last known point. So whenever we do the intake, whenever we get the notification and we are asking questions, so that way we can figure out whether or not we have enough information to deploy resources. We cannot deploy resources until we have an initial planning point. We need some place that we can start from a planning perspective. So that's either going to be a point last seen, someone saw them at a residence, someone saw them at a certain location, or a last known point. You know, they said that they were going to go hiking here at this trailhead, or we located their vehicle, or they signed a trail log. We don't have anything verifiable that specifically says that they were for sure there, or this is the last place that they were. But we have enough evidence to point to that we have enough here to start our search efforts. So this is the last known location, and the first one that we're going to use to start. A search can have multiple point last seens or last known points, but there's only one initial planning point. There's only one place where we can start this search. All right? So moving on to the next concept here, and that's this equation that equates I want to start with probability of success, okay? Probability of success is a formula, is part of a formula that determines the likelihood of a find, and it's predicated based on two things: your probability of area and your probability of detection. And we talked a little bit about probability of detection in the last module. We're going to expand on that quite a bit in this module as well. Probability area is the likelihood where a victim is in a specific area. What's the likelihood that they are in the area that we intend to search? Okay, you multiply that by your probability of detection, and that's the likelihood the victim or a clue associated with the victim is located by a search team or can be located by a search team. So these two elements together multiplied, they give you that probability of success, and that's the likelihood of a find. So to give you an example of this, we're going to take this map here, okay? And this is a very common map that you may see in search and rescue. And what you're seeing here is in the very center of the bullseye. Let me change colors on my pen here real quick so that way it stands out a little bit differently. What you see here in the middle of our bullseye is this initial planning point. Okay, this is where our search efforts are going to begin. All right, let me do that. And around this initial planning point are radials. And you'll see here where it says 25%, 50%, 75%. This is based off of some of our planning efforts. We may turn to lost person behavior to get an idea of how individuals with similar characteristics or with a similar search profile, how they have responded in the past or where they've typically been located in the past. And so we will, whenever we have enough information that we can determine that, we'll plot that on the map. So that way we could say, well, people with a similar profile, 25% of them are found within this ring. 50% are found within this ring. And we plot that on the map so that way we can go, okay, what are some of the draws? What are some of the features? How can we segment this out so that way we can search this efficiently with the resources we have? Whenever we look at basic search theory and we get into theoretical search area, which we'll get into here in a moment, theoretical search area can be so exhaustive and so expansive that there's no team out there that has enough resources for it. So we have to find ways to chop it down. Anyway, if you go by this map here, you'll see that inside of this circle, there's a 25% chance that our victim is inside of the circle. If you're just going off of the theory, if you're just going off of lost person behavior data, which is what we're going off of here, there's a 25% chance that they're inside this circle. If you have a team out there that's a really good team and you give them enough time to search a little bit, they can produce a 50% probability of detection for a victim. And we'll talk about the difference between probability of detection for a victim versus probability of detection for a clue here in a little bit. Whenever we talk probability of detection, it should be conveyed in both ways, because the likelihood that I may find a something the size of a body in a particular area is one thing. That finding a footprint or a track or a small clue is totally different. It could be totally different. But we're going to say that in this example, we're going on a victim probability of detection, and inside of that circle, the circle of 25%, we have a 50% chance of finding our victim. We could find that in there. That means our probability of success within the circle is only 12.5%. Okay, that's how the formula works. Now, if we make a find, that's fantastic. But this kind of gives you an idea of the scale of a search and how quickly a search can overwhelm resources, and the complexity of it can really overwhelm those initial responders, and why it's important for search and rescue personnel that are trained to be able to respond to events like these. Because at 50% probability of detection, depending on where that is, that could be pretty dang good. That's a very high, 50% yes or no, flip of a coin. That can be pretty good for a search team in a depending on the terrain and the vegetation and all of that. Those are good odds. But if there's only a 25% chance that they're in that area, multiply that together, that probability of success is pretty low. So that gives you a flavor from the planning side, how we look at the map, how we look at the teams, and that's how whenever we're trying to figure out how we're going to plan a search like this, that's how we do the math. Okay, that's how we do the math behind it. So some additional terminology that we need to talk through is critical spacing and purposeful wandering. Critical spacing, you'll also hear the term coverage. It's another. There's a slight variance, but they're typically used interchangeably. But this is the physical distance between searchers as they work through the search area, and this is determined by the search tactic being used. We'll talk about the tactics later on, but the critical spacing is how far apart are they going to be whenever we're going through the environment. And purposeful wandering is how we're going to move through the environment. This is how searchers are expected to move through the search area, especially whenever they're doing a grid search. Searchers are expected to check in and around areas of thick brush and concealment to ensure a thorough search of an area. If I were to just walk through an area along a trail, I could see probably, I could see what's happening on the trail pretty good because that's already cleared out. It's very easy to see on there. But as I start to move through, and there's areas that are offshoots, or there's easy points to get off of the trail, you can very quickly see where it's easy to conceal something behind a tree or behind some kind of area of concealment. So purposeful wandering says that yes, we have a specific lane or a specific area we want to do, but we want to make sure that we're weaving in and out of that area. And as a visual example, this is kind of what this looks like. All right. So we have at the top, we have what I would consider to be good purposeful wandering. You can see our guy here, our searcher. He's not just walking in a straight line like our one at the bottom here is. Our one in the straight bottom here is pretty well walking a fairly straight line through the easy stuff here. But our person up here at the top, you can see they're taking more time to come through here and get behind coverage so that way they can see behind, so that way they can see into areas. They're walking through where they can check a little bit better. They're not taking the easy path through here as they're moving through the search area. This is what purposeful wandering is. And we'll get into a little bit more about whenever we do a grid search. I have a slide where we'll talk through what the lanes look like and how we move through, how we maintain our formation and all of that. But in your lane, it's not a straight line that you're walking through. We're not just taking a walk through the woods like our searcher down here is. We don't want to do this. We want to wander through our lane. We have a purpose though. We're trying to look behind objects. We're trying to get a better vantage point on things as we're moving through the environment. That's how we should be moving through the environment. We'll pivot now and we'll talk about basic search theory. Basic search theory is this basically are the tools that our search planner our search planners are going to utilize to determine where exactly we're going to search, and it's based off of three things, and each of them have their own unique assumptions about them. And typically what happens in the end is there's not one theory that's preferred or used over another. You'll see where there's elements of each of these woven into the overall search strategy as we're determining what the assignments are, the segments, and where teams are going to go. There's usually a blend of this mixed in. The first is going to be our theoretical search area. And this is where time equals distance, okay? So how far the subject could have theoretically traveled in the elapsed time that they were missing. Now, this is assuming that the subject is capable of being mobile and has been mobile throughout the entire duration of them being missing. And what happens is we have our initial planning point, and we draw a circle around how far they could have gone in that time frame. So you take, for example, someone's been missing for 4 hours. Okay, so they've been theoretically missing for 4 hours. And then they're capable of traveling at 3 miles per hour. Okay, that means that circle that you're looking at is around 12 square miles. Okay, so that's a lot of ground. That's more area. It's a much larger area than you think it is. It could be 12 miles in any direction here. So you can quickly see how expansive that search area is. And actually, I think the circle we have here is a good representation of that. And this area right here is the city of Owensboro, Kentucky, which is a city of about 60,000 people, to give you an idea of the scale here. So this is what theoretical search, the theoretical search area could look like if we're going on the deduction that the searcher, the victim is mobile. They have been mobile and they can continue to be mobile. Okay. So this is theory one. Theory two is the statistical theory. And we touched on this in the last module with talking about lost person behavior. But that's basically what we're talking about here is lost person behavior, or if we have any information on previous searches in this area. It could go either way, but we're using statistical and behavior characteristics derived from previous search cases to predict the behavior for victims with a similar profile. What have people done previously in this area or in this type of environment with these characteristics? Lost person behavior, there's been a lot of research that's been done to identify patterns of behavior in the victims with similar backgrounds that can be used to predict the current missing's behavior. So the subject categories are grouped based on age, mental status, external influences, and the victim's activity. Again, if you can find a class to take a class and learn more about this, that is certainly optimal. You can go out and buy the book on your own as well and read through it. There's tons of information, and they do a really good job throughout the book explaining how they ended up with the assumptions that they make at the end, how they support their data. It's possible to have some overlap between these categories, and if you watch the Bob Kester video that I shared a link to it in the last video. If you go and look there, he talks about the hierarchy whenever you do have multiple categories, and I've seen it done a couple different ways, where you may follow the hierarchy that Bob Kester talks about. In that video, I've seen it where they will take the different categories that they have and they'll average out the statistics. They'll average this data out here, so that way they can kind of plan based off of that, or they'll take whatever the most likely one is, or they'll do some kind of a consensus analysis and say this is most likely the profile that we need to be chasing, or they'll kind of group it in to what's called miscellaneous. I've seen that done before as well. And none of those is, exclusively right or wrong in their own regard. It's just a way to cut the data and try to make it fit for your search. There's plenty of different ways you could do it, because it's very likely that you're going to have some overlap. Very likely. And the factors that could affect the lost person's behavior, including prior victim history, medication, substance abuse. This is all factored into looking at the statistics on this. And then lastly, we have deductive reasoning. And deductive reasoning is just simply looking at the circumstances, looking at the information that you have, looking at the map, and saying what makes sense. What if I was in that victim's position, what would I be thinking? What would I be doing? Look at their intentions, their familiarity with the area, available routes of travel, potential decision points, and then you also look at your team, your search and rescue team, as well. What are we capable of doing here, and to determine that logical plan of action. What makes sense for this particular situation. That is going to bring us to the end of this first element of search tactics. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned to the next video.